Hello, everybody. I'm Eshan Pokhrel,
My name is Cummings.
and today we are here with a special episode of the PB Political Podcast. Today, we're going to be covering the State of the Union, which happened on Tuesday night, which was 2 days ago at the time of recording. And yeah, we just want to talk about what President Biden said, how he's feeling about this next year in the United States, and what to look forward to. So, Cameron, if you want to start us off.
Yeah, sure. So, Eshaun was a little busy during the live State of the Union, so he asked me to come and just take some notes, do some research afterwards. I watched it live. I can say I forget how much clapping involves in the State of the Union. It's like he says a statement, claps, but pretty much just going into it. He started off mainly just talking about his plans that he had for re-election and as his current what he's done in his term as office and what he plans to do in his final year. One of those things was the blue collar pitch, which is promoting his economic plan, and he was assuring Americans that he wants to invest in, quote, the places and people that have been forgotten. And he's arguing that, quote, too many people have been left behind or treated like they're invisible. He pretty much broke that down and was going through what he planned to do for the rest of his year in office and how he planned to, with the help of Congress, move ahead if he gets reelected to continue pushing that idea forward.
And a lot of the stuff that President Biden, I watched the speech. I had a meeting for a class, unfortunately, so I missed some of the middle portion of the speech. But I got to watch the beginning, and I agree. He did come out strong on the economy, which was a bold strategy considering that a lot of people think the economy is not in a good place right now. Mm-hmm. But he touted things like the CHIPS Act that's gonna bring high quality manufacturing jobs to the United States over the next decade or so. Things like more infrastructure projects around the country. I remember there was like a point in his speech where he pointed out a supervisor for like a bridge building project somewhere. I was not sure the exact location.
That was what it was,
and,
at least from my knowledge.
Yeah, and he went hard on infrastructure, but emphasized the people involved, which I thought was an interesting strategy. I think working towards blue-collar voters has been what he's been trying to get at his whole career. I think it's smart. It's a smart strategy right now, especially when a lot of blue-collar workers aren't really feeling the love from the government or the economy.
And with a lot of strikes going on as well, and massive layoffs. So obviously I think coming out as strong as he did with his pitch and especially infrastructure, and like Eshaun said, people don't think the economy's in a good place. Coming out strong, proving his points on why he believes that, and showing, I guess, what you can say, numbers to back up his claims as well.
Yeah.
So I guess that leads us into Social Security.
Yeah, and also shout out to we had Warrior Met. We had Hayden Wright on the podcast a couple months ago. Shout out to them. They're still striking, so shout out to them. But yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Social Security, Medicare, fun.
Eshaun, I think I'm passing it off to you for that.
Oh, okay, I'll take it then. So that's like Social Security, Medicare, two of the biggest welfare programs in the United States. Obviously, they're heavily geared towards the elderly, at least Social Security is. So they're really tough to argue around and chip away at or anything. So Republicans in the 2022 election cycle, not all Republicans, not even a majority of Republicans, really only Senator Rick Scott from Florida, he, who has one of the highest elderly populations in the state, was a big advocate. He had a brochure leak, or he released a brochure that described like cutting Social Security or sunsetting the program, which means that Congress always has to renew these social programs like Social Security and everything like that. Medicare had a big fight over that. So they have to renew those things. Senator Scott wanted to sunset it and just end it at the next, whenever the next renewal date is, Social Security, that is. Obviously this had a lot of backlash around the country, and Democrats seized on it, and they really needed something to seize on, so they got a gift essentially from Senator Scott. And President Biden came out swinging on this point. Cameron, you can take us through that.
I didn't really have much on Medicare to talk about. I know he came out pretty hard on it, talking about it. I don't think I heard that portion of the speech when it was going on. I know I was rewatching it right before this, I know he came out hard saying like he was heavily against it and how they wanted to keep the program going. Because technically, I'm pretty sure Social Security and Medicare aren't that old a program, especially Medicare.
Yeah, I
Aren't
mean,
that old a program.
obviously,
I want to say,
yeah.
What was it, 90?
In the 90s, Bill Clinton was pushing. I don't know the exact date. I don't want to say
And
wrong, but
if they rolled it off and sunset, like you said, most people that would benefit, if millennials, they would be what, 30, 36, 38,
yeah,
even early 40s
yeah.
at best. So they wouldn't have a chance to access Social Security or Medicare at all. So they kind of feel, how do I say, kicked to the curb.
Yeah.
How they put all this money in their paychecks went to Social Security and Medicare, and they're not going to be able to reap the benefits of all those years of putting money into it,
Yeah.
and just to give it to older generations to retire on. Is how a lot of people feel.
And also, President Biden was in, he was the vice president to President Obama when Obamacare, quote unquote, like expansion of Medicare was going through the ranks and trying to be pushed through Congress, and eventually was pushed through Congress. So, I think this is a little personal to him as well because he worked so hard on the topic of Medicare and also on Social Security. He's also, I mean, obviously, I think I went through most of Social Security stuff, but there's no way. Social Security being cut is one of the least popular. We talked about this a couple weeks ago. It's the most, actually, might be the most unpopular like idea in American discourse. 70% of people are against
like
cutting Social Security.
The Democrats were clamoring for something to like hammer home, and like you said, he pretty much threw him a bone, something to pounce on, and I guess get the favor of the American citizens, because obviously nobody liked it. And if they could be that voice to say, well, we don't like it as well, they got the rally support of the people. But people that may not like the Democratic Party and what the thing they supported, they can at least say, I support them with this issue, which gave them a lot of rally support that they needed at a time like this.
And obviously, the midterms were honestly one of the best performances for a sitting president in a long time. And there's a lot of different factors, but these two issues definitely played a part. And I think Democrats were really smart to keep that momentum going, because it's not an issue you kind of like talk about for a little bit and forget, especially for millions of senior citizens and those who rely on Medicare. So I think this is a smart move from the Democrats. Should we go into the fentanyl and drug trafficking and all of that?
Sure. Before we do, I guess we'll just go straight into it. Biden, he said he wanted to stop, mainly a big thing he wanted to do is stop the production and trafficking of fentanyl, citing mainly that on prescription drugs, so he called for a major campaign to stop the production, the sale entirely, and especially the trafficking of fentanyl, which we've been a fentanyl epidemic, especially in Huntsville, where obviously me and Eshan are from. There have been a lot of people overdosing on fentanyl just in our area, as well as a lot of college campuses around the country. People have been overdosing on fentanyl, getting their hands on it where obviously they shouldn't be getting their hands on it. Biden also noted that fentanyl is killing more than 70,000 Americans a year, but his remarks were met with a lot of contempt from some members of Congress, with a lot, several Republicans shouting, "It's your fault," in quotes. So a lot of people think that it's Biden's fault the fentanyl epidemic happened, and he's the one to blame for it.
And politically, this has been the main talking point for most Republicans since like the election cycle. So outside of like Senator Scott, who kind of, I don't know what he's doing, man. I don't know why you would even bring up cutting Medicare or Social Security without proposing an alternative at least. That's not for right now. The Republicans really hammered home the border, and the border in relation to drug trafficking and fentanyl specifically. I know our latest senator, Katie Britt, her first week of being in the Senate, she went down to the border immediately. Like her, Senator Blackburn from Tennessee and Senator Hyde Smith from Mississippi, they all went down to the border and looked at border security things. I don't know. Fentanyl's been a huge part. Congressman Strong, our congressman in District 5, released a statement. Let me pull it up real quick. He released a statement after the State of the Union that I think all of the members of the Republican, or most of the members, were probably told to release a statement similar to this, and a lot of them did. President Biden, where is it? There's a lot of them. There's a lot of them. So there's a debt one. Yeah. So since Joe Biden took office, There have been over 4.5 million illegal crossings of our southern border. So there's one about the border. President Biden says their economy is strong. There's a lot of different things. There's one about the trafficking, but I can't find it. No, it was from the House. It was from the House Republicans' Twitter. So if Joe Biden were serious about wanting to crack down on illegal fentanyl distribution, he would start by securing our southern border. Retweeted by Congressman Strong, and I'm sure by many in the Republican Party. So this has been the real issue they've been trying to hammer home over the last months, and even it's pretty. I guess Speaker McCarthy really wanted to preserve the decorum of the State of the Union, and you can see him clapping after some things. So there's a lot of standing ovations from both bipartisan standing ovations, which was good to see. But there were some Republicans that shouted out, "It's your fault" in relation to the fentanyl deaths. But yeah, I don't know where I was going with that. But fentanyl has been a very big part of Republican campaigns and also hopefully Democratic solutions and Republican solutions in the next year.
Yeah. Okay, so I don't know if it's best segue, but going in from fentanyl, we're now going to talk about Biden. He didn't touch too much on education a lot, but one thing he did touch on was teacher pay. He outlined several things among expanding the access to preschool and rising the teachers' pay, obviously. And so I'm just going to state off a few facts as well as some quotes that he said. In 2021, teachers made less than 77 cents on the dollar compared with other college graduates. Yet surveys show teachers work more than 50 hours a week on average. Close to 1 in 5 work elsewhere at another job. So it's no surprise that nearly half of the U.S. schools are short of teachers. Some states and districts have proposed or enacted pay bumps, but they've been modest at best. Federal legislation again before Congress this session would set teacher salary at the floor would be $60,000, while raising teacher pay has garnered support of some Republicans. And the American Teacher Act is unlikely to get far, unfortunately. So in some states, teachers are making less than $50,000 on average. Obviously, not only the teacher shortage, there's a sub shortage as well. People can't find substitutes. Coaches for the school have to come in and be subs. Front office workers have to come in and be subs. Janitorial staff in some cases have to be called in to be subs. So obviously the pay of teachers and the pay of the substitute teachers is something that is not only necessary but required if we're going to keep them and keep bringing in highly educated and highly motivated teachers that not only want to help benefit students, but also need to make a living wage so they can eat, pay rent, and do everything that you need to do to have, live in a functioning society.
I think the main opposition to something like the American Teacher Act, because I think everybody agrees that teachers need to be paid more, they deserve more. I think the main opposition will likely be from both sides of the aisle, whoever's opposed to the issue. I think it'll likely be about the benefits that teachers get as well as the salary. I know I've spoken to teachers that have said that while they get paid $45,000 as a base, or they can work up to it, they get very good benefits from the state of Alabama. They get really good health care, dental. So I guess though if there's a trade-off on those issues and there's just a salary increase, and maybe there's some people that won't go for that, that would be my only reason to see why this would be opposed. I don't know who's against raising pay for teachers in elementary schools and middle schools and high schools around the country. But yeah, I do like that he's said it a couple times, President Biden on Twitter. I know he's been in speeches a little bit. He's talked about teacher pay, but this is the first concrete step towards actually doing anything of this about the issue. Yes.
And I guess just my last thing, being some of my family members being teachers and seeing them at some point struggle, and also buying proper equipment for the classes. A lot of things in the classes are outdated, old, as some people would say, for things past their expiration date, metaphorically speaking, where they need newer things. And obviously technology is one of the major things. COVID has shown that technology is going nowhere, and using iPads, laptops, computers are pretty much how we're going to be teaching students and teaching ourselves for years and years and years to come. And some students are using, and some schools still have completely old and outdated computers that aren't able to run the software needed to use it. So a lot of teachers have come out of pocket because they really are passionate about this, and they, the trade-off of it is a lot really unfair.
Yeah, I guess they could also, I guess to combat that issue, like instead of having teachers pay out of pocket, establish funds, like increase funding for like like a supply fund or something in schools. I agree with the teacher pay for the record. I just don't think that. I think the opposition will be towards like the what benefits are you cutting to give higher pay. I think that'll be the main reason or the main stated reason this won't go through Congress if it gets up to a vote, gets through committee and goes through a vote.
Yeah, but currently the one that's up for debate right now probably, like I said, won't go anywhere. So seeing what they can come up with to go back to the drawing board and write something up which is more universally agreed upon is the next step. But when is that step going to be taken and when is the action fully going to be followed through? That's something I don't know. I don't think anybody knows really.
I will say it's a tough sell to go back to your district and face teachers in your district and say, I don't believe your job requires higher pay. If the pay and the benefits if it's just the benefits staying the same and the pay is just increased, I don't know how Republicans or Democrats that are opposed are going to be able to swing arguing against higher teacher pay.
I think get reelected, just to be honest.
Yeah, it'll be a tough one. Let's move on to one of our final big topics. Do you want to talk about, do you want to talk about Marjorie Taylor Greene, or what do you want to talk about for the last one? Insulin, Marjorie Taylor Greene. There's a lot of, we can talk about both, honestly.
We can do you want to do Marjorie Taylor Greene, and then we can go into labor wages and finish off on insulin.
All right, so Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, she's Georgia's 10th, I believe. I might have gotten that wrong.
Yes. I'm pretty sure she's the 10th.
I think she might be. She's a vocal opponent of President Biden and of really everybody else in Congress, and she's repeatedly called for his impeachment, but she comes up now because she yelled out at him twice during the State of the Union address, and obviously you're not really supposed to interrupt the president as he's speaking. It's like people obviously do, but it's like kind of frowned upon. The first time this happened was when President Biden stated that Republicans want to cut Social Security and Medicare. She said she allegedly yelled liar, stood up and yelled liar, and later on she refutes that. She actually did that. Later on, she actually yelled a couple other times. She yelled China spied on us, quote unquote, at the end of Biden's speech.
I was referring to when he was talking about them shooting down
the balloon.
Yeah. I know she also screamed that she closed the border.
Yeah.
When he was talking about fentanyl and drug trafficking and everything, as well as it's your fault when he was talking about the crisis as well.
And obviously, if you need more info on the balloon, check out our last podcast. And we were just talking about the fentanyl crisis too, about the it's your fault. There's a couple other people that said that too. But Representative Taylor Greene, or Representative Greene, I guess, she just always finds herself to be in the news, doesn't she?
She always makes a way. Biden, I know one thing, he used his speech to pay tribute to Tyree Nichols, which is the 29-year-old African-American man who died after being beaten by Memphis police officers. Biden called for more police training and more resources to reduce violent crime, along with more investments in housing, education, and training. Yeah,
and I think it's a good, it's a good change from, Democratic posture around 2020 when they were talking about defund the police and things like that. I think this is a smarter way to approach it. President Biden's been approaching it with the more of an increased funding for the police and increased awareness for these issues, which I think is the right way to go. If not politically, then definitely actually in real life. So I do like that. I applaud him for not caving to the pressure of the defund the police movement and try to think of a more holistic way to approach it.
And then a side note, just an update on the Tyree Nichols situation. 7 other Memphis police employees, not just officers, but just employees of the Memphis Police Department, are also under investigation in Nichols' death, which was quoted by the city attorney of Memphis.
Yeah. Messy situation. Rest in peace to Tyree Nichols, obviously.
And Eshan, do you want to start talking about the tax on billionaires?
Yeah, this is actually, this one.
Insulin price?
Yeah, so this State of the Union actually had a lot of content. I think, honestly, it was much better than Biden's last one, or his last two. I do think.
It's a lot.
I think there was more. Yeah. I think there was more to break down, and also there's more bipartisan support. And we'll talk about the Republican response at the end. But President Biden brought back the billionaire tax, calling for it. But he also called for a tax on corporate stock buybacks in order to reduce the federal deficit. This is an interesting idea, actually. So his idea was that 20%, I believe corporate stocks, so corporations will buy back stocks to increase the price of the stock. It's a whole it's kind of like a financial rigging system in order to increase your shareholders' value or increase your own value as a board or whatever. He called for a 20% tax on these stock buybacks in order to reduce the federal deficit, which obviously we talk about that too. It's 33.5 trillion, something crazy. I think that's what it was, 31.5 trillion.
Some insane amount.
Yes.
You can't even comprehend.
Yeah, President Biden, he said the tax system's not fair. It's not fair. 55% of the largest, or 55 of the largest corporations in the United States made $40 billion in profits and paid zero in federal taxes. I think it's definitely an interesting idea. I don't know how much corporate taxing is gonna play in Congress. I think it's a popular issue. I think it's favored in the public. I think there's polls that favor a tax, but obviously there's a lot of other special interest groups will pay politicians. There's a lot of lobbying, a lot of stuff that goes into this not becoming feasible in the near future, unfortunately. Another thing President Biden was that I found that he said that broke that he was going to talk about, but he actually did, was trying to cut out junk fees in airline travel and cable companies and banks, and I thought that was kind of interesting because I really hadn't heard about that.
Just a point, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Go ahead.
I know going to junk fees, Ticketmaster, they're under massive scrutiny now by the U.S. government for exorbitant, not only price gouging, but allowing scalpers and everything else to come in, steal tickets. Just say a Beyonce ticket for $100, now scalping for $15,000, and then a ticket should be only worth $100 face value, but they end up paying $212 after fees and taxes and all that is in the end. So they're under massive scrutiny, as well as other companies, not as obviously not to the scale of Ticketmaster, are under scrutiny for it, which I guess Biden called junk fees.
Yeah, I think they're going to. I heard they might try to bring an antitrust lawsuit against Ticketmaster if they can build a case. So that'll definitely be interesting and something to watch in the future. And let's go ahead and move into insulin now, which is nearing the end here. So President Biden, last year, the Inflation Reduction Act, which passed, I believe in December, it passed last Congress. It established a $35 price cap on insulin for those on Medicare, I believe. So there's a little bit of stipulation. Yeah, I think it's those on Medicare. There's a $35 cap on insulin. Now, on Tuesday he called for lowering that cap, or broadening the scope of the cap, and I think this is also something that bipartisan, or politically at least, should be a bipartisan issue, mainly because a lot of the South, which has some of the highest rates of diabetes, is represented by Republicans who obviously are going to oppose what President Biden says most of the time, obviously not all the time, nowhere close to all the time. But it'll be interesting to see. From my perspective, I think this is an interesting hand to play from President Biden, especially heading into a re-election campaign that will start heating up at the end of this year. And what do you think about that?
Yeah, did you read off that quote that was there?
No, I've not read the quote.
Sure. I guess I'll start off with my point on that. 1 in 10 Americans, obviously Biden quoted and said, 1 in 10 Americans had diabetes. Many people in this chamber do, in the audience, Biden said. And every day millions need insulin to control their diabetes so they can literally stay alive. Not only, honestly, that was one of the most, it was just a public call out, not only to the American citizens, but as he said, people in this chamber currently have diabetes. And obviously he knows that, they know that. So if they know that they have diabetes and how much it's costing them with the salaries that they have, how much would it cost somebody making half that, a quarter of that, a third of that income, and how it's affecting them and their families, and how they're having to cut back on some of the things that they need in order, like Biden said, to stay alive and get these insulin prices. And how insulin in the years has just gone up and up and up and up. Wow. Honestly, the technology has stayed relatively the same. There hasn't been new massive changes or advancements. Insulin has been insulin. There may have been a few tweaks, may have been a few modifications, a few adjustments, but nothing so massive, so game-changing that it's worth adding pretty much tripling, quadrupling, however many times over insulin is now from its original price.
Yeah, and this is a smart move again for President Biden. He knows this is a bipartisan issue, at least on the at like a citizens level. This is overwhelmingly popular to either make cap insulin prices or make insulin government subsidized and make it free, which I think at the scale of like diabetes in the United States, it kind of has a place at the table for conversation. But I think it'll be very tough for senators or representatives in like states like Alabama, Tennessee, Mississippi, Georgia, Kentucky, West Virginia, South Carolina, all these southern states that we even live in. I think it'll be tough for them to justify voting against this, especially when this is such an overwhelming need. So that'll definitely be a fight that will come up this year, leading definitely into the election in 2024. For the final thing we're going to talk about is, let's just go ahead and go into the Republican response and let's get out of here.
Sure.
So every year the opposing party gives a response to the State of the Union. This year, I think it might be every year, Republicans this year did two responses. So Governor of Arkansas, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who used to be President Trump's press secretary back in 2016 and in the early part of his presidency, went more of like a social critique type way. She criticized the quote-unquote radical left and for forcing woke culture on Americans. And this was in English, so it's a little different. They went two-pronged. They went English and Spanish. And Representative Juan Ciscomani from Arizona, not sure which district, he went with more of a policy and like a, like more of a bipartisan note. And he's did a lot of his in Spanish. So it's interesting. Clearly, they're trying to target two different wings of the party. They're trying to go for more of a conservative in culture type of base, while also appealing to the more economic and libertarian type people in their caucus. Yeah. I found it interesting that Ciscomani was chosen, obviously, I guess because he's Hispanic, he can speak Spanish. He's from Arizona, which will be a very important district, both in the Senate race in 2024 and the presidential election. But yeah, I don't know. What do you think of the dual response? First thing, what do you think? They couldn't just make it all one response. How do you think that portrays where the Republican Party's at right now?
Obviously, I feel like the party's a little divided, especially coming in, which I am honestly interested in the most. The end of this year, what's going to happen with those candidates throw their hat more into the ring for presidency. How the party's going to shake up because of that. Who do you think's going to throw their hat in and all of that? But the two different things, I feel like they're going for two demographics of people. Because obviously there are people that are in the Republican Party, not just in Congress, but just citizens. You can tell there are different parts of them. More that are obviously more right-leaning and as a Republican, more that are left-leaning Republicans. So trying to grab the middle ground of those two people and try to somehow bring them together as one. That's what I feel like they were doing. Trying to get two similarly responses, just worded different. So they didn't have one solid statement that they were like, this supports all of us. They can have, well, actually, we all also kind of feel strongly about this as well, to break it down.
Yeah. I think one interesting thing is that they didn't choose somebody like Governor DeSantis or Governor Nome of South Dakota. Those are two people that have been trying to like lay the foundations for a presidential bid in the near future. Especially DeSantis, obviously, people really want him to run. I think the Republican Party could have chosen someone like them. Then that would have been almost kind of like a endorsement.
Like a push to say we support him.
Yeah, I feel like that was. So I find it interesting they went with Governor Sanders, who is like in her first term. She just won her election in Arkansas, and yeah, Ciscomani was interesting. Maybe he'll be a player in the future. I don't really know much about him. I just remember hearing his name during the speaker votes a lot because they say the roll call votes. But he's 40 years old, born in Mexico, so can't run for president. But he could be a major player in the future of the Republican Party, and I think that's a smart move to give him more of an economic and more like a grounded in like a realism type response. So I think that was a smart play from the Republicans, and also a smart play. Maybe President Trump has something to do with not having the response be from Governor DeSantis or anyone else who could possibly challenge him in 2024.
Yeah, I mean, overall, this was like you said earlier. This was far more interesting and more like content wise to go through. And obviously, we didn't even hit everything. We hit most of the big points. There's still little things that he said that caused an uproar, obviously online and within the two parties, either bipartisan or something that one party did not agree with. Compared to this last year, this was far more interesting and far more to talk about and far more to keep going into and see what he said and the things that he did during that to see how they'll play out nearing the end of his term.
Yeah, I think that's about everything. We just wanted to bring this special episode because, again, normally this is a pretty boring affair. This time it was much more interesting. I think, honestly, seeing President Biden with a little bit more fire and, energy was
came out with fire.
Yeah,
100%.
It was a good look for the country and also just for him politically, of course. But yeah, thank you for watching. I don't know if anything else to say. You guys know where to find us. PB Political AO, PB Political Podcast, both on Instagram. Also, podcasts everywhere. Tell all your friends. Get them to follow us. Greatly appreciated. Check the website out. New stuff every day. Do you have anything to add, Cam?
No. Follow me and Eshan on Instagram as well.
Yeah. If you want to.
That's about it.
Cameron really wants those Instagram followers, so go follow him, guys.
I'm so close.
All right, without further ado, that's everything. I'm Eshan Pokhrel.
My name is Cameron Cummings.
And goodbye.